Welcome to the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com.
And I'm Jill Nowacki, founder and president and CEO of Humanidei. Thanks for joining us today, where we're continuing to explore what it really means to lead with authenticity at heart.
This episode is brought to you by the Sheeter Group, a leading executive benefits firm that meets your retention and succession needs, from non-qualified benefits plans to compensation studies and performance design. They're helping credit unions invest in leadership that lasts. You can learn more at thesheetergroup.com.
In today's conversation, we're discussing something that comes up quite often for leaders, organizations, and even careers. Sometimes more often than we're even willing to admit. It's the pivot.
That moment when you realize the path you're on isn't the one you need to stay on. And if you have to make a change, sometimes it's a strategic shift. Other times, maybe it's a leadership adjustment. Sometimes it's a whole new direction in either your career or even life.
Sometimes it's just that small turn that opens up an entirely new opportunity. I talk about that sometimes. A 2-degree shift takes you to a whole different trajectory. And so today we're going to unpack when and how to pivot, what makes it hard, but why it can be one of the healthiest moves you ever make as a leader. Let's dive right into that.
Let's start with recognizing that need for pivot. I feel like some pivots are kind of loud and obvious and just smack us in the face. You hit a wall, something changes. You can't keep doing things the same way, but others are quieter. They kind of creep in. It's a feeling. It's like it kind of builds over time. You're like, something's not right, but it's tough to put a finger on. Not sure what it is or if you should do anything about it. How do you know when it is that time to pivot?
It's a great question. And it's funny because so often I feel like it's either burnout or boredom that drives you toward a pivot, or crisis, I guess, too, when you're talking about maybe a strategic direction change on that. And so if it's burnout that's driving you toward a pivot, that feels a whole lot different than if it's boredom that's driving you toward that pivot. And if it's the fact that you're not getting results anymore, say there's a project you're implementing and it's not working and that's driving you toward a pivot, that's kind of a whole nother thing. And so I
think that's important though, right? Like there's internal and external metrics that we're looking at when we talk about pivot, right?
Well, yeah. And externally, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, your success metric was meant to be 6% membership growth and instead you lost members, like you got to do something different. You can't keep chasing that same thing and hoping for a different result here. But then internally, I think you recognize some signs within yourself. Like maybe the work isn't fun anymore and there needs to be a change there. You're not as excited to get out of bed and go put it in. Or you just find that you don't feel creative. You don't feel like you have ideas anymore. And it's just, there's that disconnect there that can move us forward as a quieter signal. Not somebody from the outside saying, you better make a change, but you feeling those things inside with that too. What about you? What do you think are some of the signs that you've seen in yourself or in others when you've known it was time to do something different?
I will answer that. I also want to make sure that we're looking at like the organization as well, or when we talked about things that we're doing. I think both you and I like change. And we both know that. For me, whether if we're talking about CUInsight and we're looking strategically, like it's watching what other publications are doing. Like bigger publications, whether it's national publications, and the way that people are consuming information. And if we're like, no, we're going to do the same thing the same way as we did 16 years ago, well, we probably wouldn't be in business till today, right? So we've like along the way, there's that constant that I think it's a good exercise to have where you're constantly looking at, they don't have to be huge ones, but where you're making those. From a personal side, I think things still have to be fun. I'll use this podcast as an example. A couple hundred episodes in, kind of felt like I was doing the same thing for many, many years. And it was like, okay, it was losing a little bit of the fun. So at that point, I have either just keep doing it. I could stop doing it altogether, which I really wasn't ready to do, or I could make a pivot and bring on a co-host. You're not going to fit this year, right? So, but that wasn't a metrics decision.
Right.
That was a enjoyment of doing something that for so long I absolutely loved, but was becoming more work. In my mind, it was that feeling internally where I'm just like, something needs to change here because I want to keep doing this. And I think that is something that we all should look at. And is boredom part of that as well? We don't have to be bored, right? Like we can have fun doing what we do. And
I think one thing you started your response there to speak about the idea of when to pivot an organization, not just when to pivot like personally and your own decisions. Yeah. When I was in my 20s, maybe there were two things that I was like, ooh, I want this kind of job. And the two jobs that I'm throwing up air quotes that other people can't see were being a philanthropist and being a zeitgeist. And both of them are things that you need sort of more than just like training to do. Like you need a lot of money to be a philanthropist, for example. But this concept of like the zeitgeist, or now I think people are kind of embracing this title of futurist, but that idea that you're scanning the landscape and you're anticipating trends that haven't happened yet, thinking about what might come. And I even think about you starting the CUInsight Experience podcast in the first place, however many years ago that was a pivot in some ways, because it was a new product, and it was looking at, you weren't the first person ever to do a podcast by any means, but like it was looking at how are people changing the way they're receiving information? How do you continue to deliver CUInsight content in that same way? And I think right now, just in the business I do and looking at the way people engage with the workplace, like if you were still running executive recruiting today, how it was run 10 years ago, it wouldn't be relevant anymore. And so those external signs that you're looking for too are, I think, changing consumer behaviors, changing consumer expectations that you have to kind of like, oop, I better adjust now or I'm going to be left behind on this and not relevant anymore too. So that's where I think organizations need to be, is like deeply in touch with the behaviors of humans too.
Absolutely. And I think that's to go on your side of the business more as well, is people change, right? For many years, I've mentioned on the podcast, the books that many of us grew up reading on leadership seem very, I don't want to say not relevant today, but they're a different style of, I think, leadership than most people have realized that the type of leader you need to be. And that most team members also have an expectation that it's not just, it's my way or the highway, or check all your problems at the door and come in and just put your head down and work and you be the first one in, the last one out, and all that good stuff that we always kind of heard. So yeah, I do think that from a leadership perspective, organizationally, there's pivots that we have to make to stay relevant and to stay good at what we do. And then personally, I think that's a constant. I mean, I'm not sure I said it on the podcast. I may have, but you and I have had many conversations. I just had a birthday. I'm into my 50s now, 51. But when I think back at the person I was in my 40s, or the person I was in my 30s, or the person I was in my 20s, like things change over time. I change over time. So to think that, to use your term, what lights me up would be the same in my 20s as it is now in my 50s.
Thank goodness it's not the same.
Right.
No.
And that to me is also, we talk a lot on the podcast that you and I do about being intentional on what we do. And is it time for the pivot? If you're not feeling happy, if you're feeling unease or bored or just something things off, it seems off in life, is it time to maybe take a look at the big pivot or that 2 degrees you mentioned earlier?
Yeah. And this is interesting because I recognize sort of a proximity bias that, as in I'm close to these situations a lot, but like, because of just the nature of what I do, I am typically talking to people when they are in the midst of a transition, right? It's either I'm talking to an organization that's looking for another leader, or I'm talking to a leader who's looking for another job, or I'm even coaching people who are looking for the coaching for some specific reason. And so I recognize the bias I might have just because of the information I'm taking in and what I'm surrounded by. But I do feel...
I don't talk to nearly as many people about switching careers and stuff. So.
But it does feel to me like, and so I guess I'm asking this of you, like based on just your interactions with the world, does it feel to you like people are less afraid of change and more willing to make those moves than maybe they used to be. Like, I feel like the pace of change of the world is really fast, and I feel like people are keeping up with making big moves and making bold moves.
I do think you're right that you have a bias when it comes to this because you're talking to everybody. Nobody's like calling you up going, hey, Jill, I want to stay the same.
Yeah.
Like at all, right? Like
Right.
you don't get that phone call ever. But I will say, I feel like all too often it's been like since the pandemic, people want different things.
Yes.
And to me, that's like so far removed that I think people have settled back into routines and things like that. Now, over the past few decades, that idea of that loyalty that people have towards a company to stay there 35 years to get the gold watch and the company's going to take care of you the rest of your life, like on both sides, that really doesn't happen anymore. I think there has been an ongoing, personally, it's just my opinion, I don't do this for a living, but I think there's been an ongoing where people are more willing to move or more willing to look at opportunities or more willing not to stay put. But I do think, I mean, we'll get to this, I think, a little bit later in the podcast, but I do think that's a big thing where just because some people are looking to maybe move or change or do something different, there are still a whole heck of a lot of people who love consistency and want to do the same thing. And the idea that it scares them. And that's, I think, to kind of move into the second thing that in our notes we wanted to talk about was this idea of like, why is pivoting hard sometimes? Like for you and I, we may be like, we like change. Let's just pivot all the time. But I think for many, and even for ourselves, right? Like there's been plenty of situations where it's, I feel like I know what the right move is. Why am I delaying doing it? What's holding me back? So your thoughts on change and pivoting and why sometimes it does seem freaky hard.
Yeah, this is interesting. So I got certified in a new assessment yesterday morning. So you could expect that I'll have you guinea pig that one, I'm sure. But one of the factors that it measures is a need for stability. And it's probably not so when you're getting certified, you always have to take the assessment so that it can explain how you are to you. And I have a very low need for stability. Like I'm really good with change, with fluidity, with dealing with ambiguity. And I would imagine that you probably are too. But it is more common for people to score higher on that need for stability, which is that sort of expectation that there's some consistency, that we can expect the same. And so if that's the case, most people, and despite what you and I see in our interactions with one another, most people are less comfortable with change. They need more clarity in what to expect is going to happen next month, next year, next decade in their retirement. And then there are some people who are more comfortable with the idea of like, ooh, surprises. This is fantastic. And so recognizing that sort of natural lean toward the need for stability, a lot of what drives that need or what comes out of that is the stability creates a sense of safety. It creates a sense of knowing what to expect that helps. And when you make a pivot, even if you can say, hey, I'm a 6 at satisfaction, and I believe I should live at a minimum of an 8, and I know I need to change something in order to get to an 8, but what if that change drops me to a 4? Then I'm better off staying at a 6 than I am going backwards. And there's no guarantee that if I change, it's going to work or come together. And so I think that's a big obstacle is that, there's just no guarantees. So.
And I think for leaders too, I mean, we have a sense of responsibility for the people on our teams. And I think a lot of us take that on very seriously. And we know team members like a little more stability. We worry about what change might be for them. And there's a lot, like you said, even if you're talking personally, going from, you want to go from a 6 to an 8, but you go to a 4, the same thing. If you're running an organization and you're like, ooh, we got to make a change here. And instead of a 6 to an 8, you go to a 4, you might take a reputation hit. I mean, there's,
And I guess it disengages when they don't feel safe, right? So, yeah.
There's something that kept popping into my head when I was thinking about this, that sometimes it's the real courage that is acknowledging that staying the same isn't always the safest path. You've heard me say it a bunch when we're talking business and things like that. I'm a firm believer that there's no such thing as staying put. You're either growing or you're dying. And that doesn't mean that you have to grow Silicon Valley 100% every year, but companies can die a slow death from 1,000 cuts also if you don't keep moving forward and growing. And that to me, as the leader of an organization, I think that's something that has to be front and center always, is like, are we, to use the term, making the right pivots to make sure that we're still moving forward? Because again, you've heard me say since the first time that Dave and I had our first employee at CUInsight many years ago, I felt my responsibility changed. Like, I want to make sure that we're providing an environment that people can have long and fruitful careers, and they can feel stable and safe and know they're getting a paycheck next week, and that they have the opportunity to be here for a long time if they so choose. So I get that. You don't want to just, all right, we're going to scrap everything we're doing and start from scratch. It's a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
So.
And pivoting too much, there's a reality to this too, is that like, if you don't pivot at all, you're probably going to become irrelevant. But if you pivot too much, you might not follow a path to success. You might change it just before you get to success. And so there is that courage to make the move, that ability to say, now is the time and this is the move. And then if you're making that decision as a leader, then that puts you in a position to say, okay, you've made the decision and you're comfortable with it. How do you lead through that? How do you bring the team along with
my next question?
So they can get there too.
Dave and I have asked you that a million times, right? Like, and I know that that's something that you mentioned, coaching and the work that you're doing. There is oftentimes leadership pivots that come in that. So how do you address, or how do you coach, and how do you internally in your own organization address those fears of your team?
So the reality is, when you make a pivot, you cannot guarantee the outcome of it. There is some unknown to that. What a leader can give a team, though, is transparency. So here's why we're making this pivot. Here's what we expect to happen. Here are some of the challenges that may come up along the way. Here are some of the questions we anticipate you having and the answers we have today. What other questions do you have for us that we might be able to get for you? But I mean, because that is the reality, that if we were to say, oh, hey, we're going to, if I'm running a credit union and I decide we're going to change our charter or change our delivery model or change our field of membership, and somebody says, well, what is going to happen? Well, we would like it to result in this level of membership growth or this, but like, I can't guarantee that until it actually happens. And then you might also get the question, well, what if that doesn't work? Well, and as a leader, you can't just say, putting all our chips in and we'll see what happens. You have to be able to give some idea of what to expect. But in order to be credible, you also have to recognize that we don't have all the answers right now. And so that communicating the vision of what could be, but also staying rooted in the reality of there being some unknowns, I think is really important. And then inviting that team in to say, and what haven't we thought of? Like, what are you thinking of that might come up? Where are you having some fears? And I think too often, especially as like leaders who get excited about the pivot, who get really excited about their own great creative ideas, they're like, we're going to do this. And then someone on the team says, ooh, but that might not work. And for some of us, our first instinct is to be like, well, you're just not visionary enough. You're just not like, and to shut that person down instead of hearing what they say and then that makes you, if you raise an objection and your leader shoots you down, that makes you even less comfortable with the change because it feels like, oh boy, we are not going in this with eyes wide open here too, in that case. So
when I think of whether it was internally at CUInsight or, watching credit unions change from that blimp level that I've been able to do for quite some time now. To me, it feels like that's pivots, whether it's opening up field of membership. The leaders still honor where the team was in the past and what was built. They're not like, we're starting fire at all of that. It doesn't exist anymore. And now we move forward. It's still like honoring where the team has been, where the organization has been, while also guiding towards that vision for the future. But it doesn't mean just because you change your name and open up your field of membership doesn't mean that a huge portion of your members are pick the seg group that built you over the years. And all those people that are on your team that have been with the credit union for years or the organization for years, they still have an affinity to that as well. So like I said, just from personal experience and watching the good and the bad of pivots, I really do think that not forgetting the past just because we're moving forward, right? And that's a big step.
Yeah, I think about this, like the leaders making a pivot and involving a team. And I think about like a new leader coming into an organization or what I shouldn't even necessarily say a new leader coming in, but a leader deciding it's time to make a change. And by the time the leader decides it's time to make a change, they've probably done a lot of processing, done a lot of research, collected a lot. And so like when they're ready to change, they're ready to do it now. And so sometimes it does happen with new leaders who come in and they have this sense of urgency of like, I've got to get all of these things done within the first year to prove to the board that they hired the right person for this. So they're moving with this huge sense of urgency of like, we just have to move forward. We just have to move forward. We just have to move forward. And when we move forward like that, sometimes we do neglect to honor the past. Like we neglect to take the time to appreciate what's been done to lead to this, to appreciate the individuals who have given input. And again, going back to that place of, well, if they're not with me, they're against me. We just have to charge forward. When if you can really stop that and balance that urgency with the level of patience that might be needed to bring others along, you might not get started as fast, but you might get to the finish line more quickly than if you just shoot out of those starter blocks, like without paying attention to whether everybody else is lined up with you or not.
Patience. Oh, so hard. When you get excited about something, you just want to go full steam ahead. I mean, what you say just resonates with me so much. You have to understand that all the people around you have not put in that mental time that you have to get ready for this. And if you just pop into the meeting and you're like, here's what we're doing tomorrow.
Like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
And that's, I love the time those pivots can feel to teams like, oh, we're just chasing squirrels or like shiny objects over here. And the leader feels like, what are they thinking? This is super calculated. Like there's a lot of thought that went into this. It takes a while to bring others along. And that definitely demands a sense of patience that really can build trust though, and get more alignment around those shifts too.
I was thinking that when we do make these changes, it's also important to celebrate the milestone. So, and I think that's also a great time to reinforce why we're doing what we're doing and that it's working. It may not be monumental shifts, but I mean, even small shifts mean that it looks like we're going in the right direction. And I think that's an important thing just to keep encouragement up, keep morale up, all that good stuff too.
That's actually a tactic I use in one-on-one coaching as well. When a leader is talking to me and feels like, they haven't done enough or they haven't made enough of an impact or things aren't moving fast enough, I will ask them to actually, choose a time. So we're in August right now. So like look back at every August for the past like 5 years and think about like, what were you doing in August of 24? What were you doing in August of 23? What were you doing in August of 22? And like really recognize how much change you have brought to fruition, much you have accomplished since that time. Because so often we can get to that point where we think, man, I need to shake things up. I need to do something differently. I haven't done enough. But like to truly inventory that, you can see that maybe you didn't keep shifting like sharp turns, but these little shifts in the trajectory you've made have truly put you in a very different place today than you were 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago too. And I think that can be true of organizations as well. Like if an organization has said, okay, we're 3 billion today and our milestone goal is 10 billion in assets, you don't do that overnight. That's a growth plan. And it can be, if you get so hyper-focused on that one growth metric, you might miss some of those other wins that you're having along the way too.
Absolutely.
So we've talked at the organizational level. We've talked a little bit about other individuals, and we talked a little bit about you changing this podcast. But When you think about kind of life as a whole, what's that? I won't even say have you, because I know you have. So what's you think about a pivot you made in your life that really changed everything for you? What's a big one for you?
That's such an interesting question. And I've told the story of my getting into credit unions, I think, many times on the podcast, but it really, it wasn't an overnight thing. Early in my career, having some success, but going, wow, that's not it. So I was having financial success, maybe. It sure didn't feel like something I wanted to do for the next 30 years. And it took time. And it took stages to get to many stages, to tell you the truth, and some low times and things like that to get to the point of even getting into credit unions. And then a little while after that, Dave and I coming up with the idea for CUInsight. And that really did change everything, but it was completely against. I get the question all the time. Did you go to school for journalism? No, still not a journalist. It was the thing that I wanted to be from the time I was 14 until I was actually it for about 10 years. Was completely had nothing to do with a digital trade publication for credit unions. So that was kind of that longer game pivot. But then that's even happened over the time at CUInsight, realizing that there was so far that we could take this as a founder led, like what's bouncing around my brain and Dave's brain type thing, to actually growing up the organization more. And that was a switch almost 6 years ago now too, that had to be made. But that was a pivot too, and mentality. Like, what is the part that's exciting for me? Where do I best use my talents? And managing day to day was not it. So that was a change. And if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I was like, I'm that type of person who's always going to just be working and have a job, whatever. And now I'm like, I really prefer the more strategic, side of things, and having conversations like this and doing that than I do going to 20 conferences a year and doing all the other things that I thought I was going to miss terribly. That I miss the people, but we still get to have them on the podcast. So,
Right.
So that was a big one for me. And I mean, I think your personal ones as well, but I think those are both business, right? Like, there's.
But I was going to actually wait. Like, I kind of expected you to talk about, and I see it when I think about your timeline. I think a major pivot you made that might not have felt that monumental, but did change the trajectory for everything, was shutting down the office and going to a fully remote CUInsight Experience. Because I feel like what that did was create so many, like, it opened so many more doors and options to you. Whereas if you had been bound to an office, then some of those long-term travel decisions you made, and so that to me is kind of an example of a professional decision you made that changed your trajectory, both professionally and personally, as far as how you work. And I think if you hadn't done that, I wonder if you ever would have been able to make the move to go from like founding CEO to more strategic advisor and founder too.
That's an interesting point that I wasn't thinking about, but you're so right on with that, right? But that's also one of those pivots that didn't happen overnight type of thing. Like, that was something that was on my mind for a couple of years. And it was like starting to test things with the team to see about productivity. It wasn't like just jumping in. It may have felt that way to the team a little bit, but they're listening and they look back. It was like suddenly in July, it was like, well, if everybody wants to work from home, you can. In December's, we were working from home instead of coming in. Or if people wanted to work in the mornings from home, you come in later. There was a lead up to then where it just kind of kept extending to being like, do we really need the office anymore? But it was intention. And for me, there was a personal side of that too, that I wanted more travel and more long-term travel and things like that. And people that know us and know me, it was not on vacation. There were times I was on the other side of the world and on Zoom calls at 2:00 in the morning. A lot of that was pre-Zoom actually, but I mean, I was still on calls at 2:00 in the morning, just like it was 2:00 in the afternoon, on the East Coast. So yeah, that was a big one, and it completely changed my life.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing to reflect on now, though, because now looking at this decision you made in 2017 or something, to look at it from 2025, it's like, well, obviously you did that. What else would there have been to do, right? And so that being able to look back at something when you know all the facts and how that can change the story of like, well, of course, that was the most logical move. And because we did this, it led to this and this and this and this. And that's how we ended up here today. Whereas, like, at the time when you're making that pivot, the story might be a little bit different. And so it's so interesting to me how once we know the result, how hindsight can really change the story of how and why we came to that pivot too.
How about you? I know you've had them too. I feel like I'm talking too much and stuff.
I mean, to that point of the hindsight and the way it changes it, I look at my career, and when I tell people I lived in Montana and then DC and then Oregon and then Connecticut, people are like, oh, couldn't make up your mind. You kept going like all over the country on it. But when I talk about it, as far as every role I've had has built toward where I am today, and I always stayed in the credit union space, those pivots don't seem like I just get restless. They seem like I'm intentionally building toward this outcome. Now, it wasn't like there was a point before I made the decision to found Humanidei that if somebody had said, hey, are you going to do this? I would have said, well, of course, that's the logical next step. And so it is, again, that idea of hindsight influencing it, like all of these things. When I took the job as a league president, I thought, league presidents, they measure their tenure in decades, not in years. I thought, of course, I'll be here until the end of time on that decision. And I loved being a league president, but in that role, I became sort of enlightened about things that I think also needed to be done for the credit union system that I felt really drew from my strengths and those things that energized me. And so I made that decision. That had somebody asked me 3 years before, if I was like, I would have been like, no, I'm never going to leave this type of career path into going out and doing something more entrepreneurial and something on my own. But now it's like, well, of course, that's what it was building toward that whole time on it.
You said something, and I don't think it was maybe necessarily directed at this, but it did make it registered with me, is oftentimes when personal pivots happen, people that know you or around you may question what you're doing. I don't know if I've told this story many times. For many years of CUInsight, my mother was still sending me that Ford was hiring and had a nice pension. Until she walked into her credit union in Clawson, Michigan, and they knew what CUInsight was. Then she was like, oh, maybe this is working. Similar story with my father, where when I shut down her office and I was working from all over the world, he thought I was blowing up everything because he'd spent 35 years in corporate America going in every day from 8 to 5, right? So
my dad still wants to know if Mark Zuck will give me my old job back, right?
That's right. That maps from many. Yeah. So it's like that understanding of like a lot of the people that are closest to us. It's an interesting thing. And I think that can go through to teams, to business partners, to everybody, where it's just like, oh, what are you doing? I got a plan. Makes sense to me. And I'll be honest, there's a certain sense that if you're trying to please everybody else with the decisions you're making for your life, it's just not possible. The same way that they make decisions professionally or personally in their life that you're like, oh, I sure wouldn't do that. I hope it works well for you. But, I hope it lights you up.
If you're chasing success as defined by someone else, you're never going to feel like you're enough. And that's kind of, if you're not making a pivot because it makes someone else uncomfortable, you're never going to have what you could ultimately achieve for your own self, if that's the. And so I guess that's the balance as a leader. As you're looking at that and you're just trying to decide what to do to grow, you have to give consideration to where others' comfort level is, but you can't make the decision based on other people's comfort level, because then you won't ever make those bold moves, whether they're personally or professionally.
That is very true. I was just laughing to myself because I thought of another story, but we'll save that for another episode. I feel like I've thrown enough of them out. You got to say something. We still have many more episodes in this kind of series that we're doing on the human leadership experience, let's call it. So anyway, as we wrap this up, we like to leave with a couple parting thoughts, something like some takeaways. So I'm going to put you on the spot since we don't have a guest this time.
Okay.
I think I always put you on the spot, but I get to go last. So Out of this conversation, when you were thinking about this idea of pivot, this was one, like, you brought this topic up, and what do you want people to take away, to sit with?
I think I would just give people the encouragement to explore that pivot they're thinking about. And the reality of it is, I think when we're on the precipice of change, is that the right word? Hopefully that's the right word. We're on the edge of change. It seems like, oh my gosh, we're going to make this move. And if it goes wrong, there's going to be no bouncing back from it. And the reality is we can make that pivot. And if it's not the right pivot, we can pivot again. People are so resilient, and even making a small change, that can lead to a huge transformation. And so I guess going back to that, what are those early signs of pivot, burnout, boredom, somebody from the outside saying, if you don't change, we're going to die? Like the whatever signal is coming your way to push you toward the pivot, listen to it and make the move, because more than likely what happens on the other side of that pivot is going to be exactly where you need to be. And you'll realize that with hindsight, maybe. So what about you? What's your takeaway?
I think about, it really was something that you said early on about when we hear the word pivot, I think we all think of just these monumental changes. And sometimes I think even when we look back, it's the big changes that we go back to. But that, like you said, the 2 degrees. So with that, what I would say is, and what I would like to leave with people is this idea that if you're feeling all those feelings, whether it's as an organization or individually or as a leader or with your team, like, take that pause, look at it. What are the options? Like, you don't have to just keep doing the same thing over and over again if it's either not working or just doesn't feel good to you anymore, right? And then Rome wasn't built in a day. Sometimes there are monumental changes, like changing a job or that type of a thing. But other times it's like, what can you do today to get one step closer? And that to me is a big thing that I think in conversations, when I have conversations with people and they're asking me whether it's advice or just part of my story, it's like, it's not what you saw on Instagram 4 years later. It's those little things that like happened along the way. But the most discouraging thing, and I think back to a strategic planning session we had that you facilitated a couple of years ago at CUInsight. And it was, for me, you asked us at the end of the day, what would make us unhappy next year at this time? And to me, I was like, if we're still talking about exactly the same thing. And often in conversations, I have the same conversations with people 1 year, 2 years, 3 years later. And it's like, if you're still unhappy 3 years later, what did you do in the meantime to make little pivots, to just move a step forward to closer to where you want to be? So that was a long-winded way of saying, take the small steps. It's they turn into big life changes, right? Like over time, and hopefully you find joy in it. And as you said, if you don't, pivot again. Yeah. You'll find it. As we wrap up, if you're feeling the pull towards change, whether it's strategy shift or leadership adjustment or whole new career path, just don't ignore it.
That's right. Give yourself permission to explore it. Look into what a pivot could mean and recognize that those small turns, they don't take away your momentum, and they can lead to big transformation too.
Once again, a big thank you to the Sheeter Group for their continued support of the podcast and these conversations. As always, check out the show notes for links and resources and ways to stay in touch. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast player, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. We're on all of them. So
we'll be back soon. We'll get Randy's story that he left us with the cliffhanger on today. In the next
I'm 51 now. I'll probably forget it. So.
So we will be back soon. But until then, be well, be kind, and keep moving toward that future that you want to create.
Thank you all for listening. We appreciate you.